Hello, my dear ones. It's Lida here again. And before I start this story that has been heavy on my heart for a long time, I want to ask you something that always makes me smile. Where are you listening from today? Which country, which city, which little corner of the world are you sitting in as you hear my old voice tell this tale? I imagine some of you in cozy rooms with tea, some on buses with headphones, some in faraway places I may never see with my own eyes. But in this moment we are all together. That thought gives me comfort, because the story I'm about to tell you is one I never thought I would have to live through, and even now, sharing it makes my hands tremble just a little. But before I begin, let me gently remind you, if you enjoy these stories, please like this video, subscribe to my channel, and ring that bell icon so you won't miss the next time I sit down to share something from my life, because this one is full of twists that may leave you wondering what you would have done in my place. Life had settled into a slow rhythm for me after my husband passed. I kept myself busy with my garden, the knitting basket by my chair, and the quiet joy of baking pies that filled my small kitchen with the smell of apples and cinnamon. My son Mark would call when he could, always rushing between work and responsibilities, and though I missed seeing him more often, I understood. His wife Linda, however, seemed to appear more and more. At first I thought it was kindness. She would arrive with groceries, help sweep the porch, sit at my table and sip tea while asking about my day. Her presence filled the lonely silence, and for a while I welcomed it, even praised her in my heart for being such a thoughtful daughter-in-law. But slowly, small things began to catch my attention, things that made me pause even when I tried to push them aside. Instead of asking about my health or whether I needed help with errands, she would slip in questions that dug deeper, questions about money. "So, Mom, how much is your pension again?" she asked one afternoon, her eyes flicking toward the envelopes on the counter. Another time she tilted her head and said, "Do you still keep that old savings account you and Dad opened?" The words seemed casual, but her tone felt rehearsed, her gaze too sharp, like she was measuring me with every syllable. I brushed it off at first, telling myself she was just curious. But inside, a small voice whispered, "Pay attention. Friends, tell me honestly, what would you think if you were in my place? Would you shrug it off and believe she only wanted to help? Or would you feel that little prickle of doubt in your chest, the one you try to ignore but cannot?" Please share in the comments, because I know some of you have faced family situations where trust and suspicion sit side by side, and it is not easy to know which one to follow. That prickle grew sharper the day I mentioned needing to go to the bank. Before I could finish the sentence, Linda leaned forward with a too bright smile and said, "Oh, you shouldn't trouble yourself with that, Mom. I can handle it for you." I laughed politely, but her words clung to me all evening like a shadow I could not shake. That night, lying in bed with the tick of the old clock echoing down the hallway, I kept replaying the conversation. Why would she want to take care of my bank errands? Why was she so interested in numbers, accounts, and papers that should have meant little to her? Days passed, and I tried to ignore my unease, but it only grew worse. Then one afternoon she arrived earlier than usual, carrying a pie that smelled of apples, her face lit with a smile that almost convinced me to relax. We sat together in the kitchen, steam rising from our teacups, and out of nowhere she said, "Mom, have you ever thought of adding my name to your account? Just in case something happened to you, it would make things easier for everyone." I nearly dropped my spoon. My heart pounded, and though I forced a smile, I felt a wave of cold run through me. Why not Mark, my own son? Why her? I nodded weakly, but that night I could not close my eyes. I turned on my side, then on my back, hearing the creaks of the old house around me, whispering into the silence, "Something isn't right." And that whisper stayed with me, louder each day, until it was no longer a whisper but a truth I could not ignore. The days after Linda's strange suggestion about adding her name to my account felt heavier than usual, as though the air inside my little house had grown thick with suspicion, and no matter how much I opened the windows or busied myself with chores, I could not shake the feeling that I was being watched even in my own home. I tried to convince myself that perhaps I had misunderstood, that maybe she only meant well, but every time she returned, I saw signs that deepened my unease. She began picking up my mail before I could reach the door, her hands lingering on envelopes from the bank, her eyes scanning the letters before placing them on the table with a too casual smile. Once when I walked into the kitchen, I found her standing by my desk where I keep old folders and documents. And though she quickly stepped back and said she was looking for a pen, I noticed a sheet of paper half pulled from the drawer. My heart skipped, but I pretended not to see because I wanted to test her. I wanted to know for sure whether the voice inside my head was warning me of danger or only playing tricks on an old woman who had grown too suspicious. Tell me, dear friends, what would you have done if you had walked in on that scene? Would you have confronted her directly, demanding answers? Or would you, like me, have kept silent, pretending not to notice, just so you could gather more proof before speaking? I wrestled with that question all night, the ticking of my hallway clock almost accusing me of cowardice, but I told myself patience would reveal the truth in its own time. The next week brought confirmation I had not wanted. Linda sat with me over tea, her fingers drumming nervously against the cup, and then she said, "Mom, do you know how unsafe it is for someone your age to manage accounts alone? What if you get sick? What if you forget things? It would be so much better if you let me handle it." The way she said, "someone your age," stung me more than I let her see, but it also lit a fire of resolve in me. I smiled gently and said, "Oh, don't you worry about me. My memory is just fine." Inside, though, I felt the edges of betrayal cutting into me. Later, when she left, I went straight to my desk and pulled out my folders. I began to check everything. The account numbers, the passbooks, the letters. Nothing seemed missing, but a slip of paper tucked between two bank statements made my blood run cold. It was a note in Linda's handwriting, reminding herself of dates that matched when my pension was deposited. She had been keeping track. That night I could hardly breathe as I lay in bed. The shadows on my walls seemed darker than usual, and I kept asking myself over and over, is my son blind to this? Does he know? Or is she doing this behind his back? Friends, imagine this, your own child's spouse, someone you invited into your home, someone you trusted with your meals and your stories, secretly recording the rhythm of your life, the exact moments when your money arrived. Would you confront them immediately, or would you play along to see how far they would go? I chose silence, though silence burned inside me. But silence also gave me clarity, because soon an opportunity came that would show me more than I had ever expected. One Friday afternoon, Linda came while Mark was working late, and she insisted on helping me balance my checkbook. I told her kindly that I had already done it, but she pressed, saying, "Maybe I can just double-check for you, Mom. Numbers can be tricky." I handed her the book, pretending not to notice her eyes darting to the totals, her lips pressing together as though she was calculating more than just the sums in front of her. I watched her carefully, every flicker of her gaze, every twitch of her hand, and I knew then that my suspicions had not been false. Something was coming. Something was being planned. And though I was afraid, a stronger part of me whispered, "You must be ready because the truth will not hide much longer." The following week passed with a tension I could almost taste in the air, as though every creak of the floorboards and every rustle of the curtains carried a warning I could not yet decipher. And during those days, Linda's behavior grew bolder, as if she sensed that I was growing too comfortable with her visits and wanted to test how much she could get away with. One afternoon, she asked if she could help organize my desk drawers, claiming that clutter wasn't good for me at my age. And while she moved papers around, I noticed her fingers lingering on my check stubs, tracing the numbers as though committing them to memory. When I cleared my throat and asked her gently what she was looking for, she gave a startled laugh and said, "Oh, nothing, Mom. I just love seeing how neat you keep everything," before quickly shuffling the papers back into place. My heart pounded, but I kept my face calm because I was beginning to realize that my silence gave me an advantage. If she thought I trusted her, she might show her true intentions more openly. And friends, let me turn to you again. What would you have done if you saw someone, not a stranger, but your very own daughter-in-law, snooping through your financial papers under the pretense of helping? Would you slam the drawer shut and demand answers, risking a confrontation that might tear your family apart? Or would you hold your tongue and bide your time, hoping the truth would reveal itself more clearly? I wonder what choice you would have made, because I know many of you have wrestled with similar moments where suspicion and love collide. A few days later, the truth began to seep through in a way I could no longer deny. Linda arrived with a folder in hand, saying she had picked up some forms that could make things easier for me. I opened the folder, and to my shock I saw documents about power of attorney, papers that, if signed, would allow her to make financial decisions on my behalf. My hands went cold as I flipped through the pages, her voice chirping in the background about how this was just a precaution and how she only wanted to ensure my comfort. I looked at her face, smiling sweetly, but her eyes gleamed with something else, something sharp, calculating, almost hungry. That night, I cried quietly in my bed, not because of the papers, but because of the betrayal. I had welcomed her into my family, trusted her with my meals and my secrets, and here she was, trying to steal the very roof over my head. But in my tears, I also found a spark of determination, because I realized that if I allowed myself to crumble, she would win. The next day, I began writing everything down in a notebook, every visit, every strange question, every slip of the tongue. I decided that if she wanted to play a game, then I would play it better. And when Mark called to say he was too busy to visit, my heart ached, because I knew that if I told him what I suspected, he might not believe me. Have you ever been in that position, dear friends, where the person you love most might side with someone else if you speak the truth? It is a lonely place to stand, but I told myself I would endure it for the sake of uncovering the whole truth. Soon enough, I got my chance. Linda came by unexpectedly on a Wednesday, saying she had some important things to discuss, and while she thought I was in the kitchen brewing tea, I paused quietly in the hallway, listening. She was on the phone, her voice low but urgent, and though I couldn't hear every word, I caught enough. Yes, she trusts me. Soon, the account will be accessible. My blood froze. She wasn't just curious, she wasn't just nosy. She was planning something concrete, something dangerous. I stepped back silently before she saw me, my heart racing, and I whispered to myself, "It's true. She's after my money." And that night, as I stared out the window at the pale moonlight, I vowed that I would not be her victim, that I would be ready for whatever she tried next, no matter the cost. That night, after I overheard Linda's voice hissing into her phone, I didn't sleep a wink, not even a minute, because her words played over and over in my ears like a broken record, and the shadows in my room seemed to twist into shapes of warning, making me question whether I had been blind all along, or whether her mask had only just started to slip. Every creak of the old floorboards in my house sounded like someone sneaking closer. And though I tried to tell myself I was safe, my heart beat so hard against my ribs that I could hear it in my head like a drum. And I kept asking myself, why did she bring up papers? Why did she sound so eager? And worst of all, who was she really talking to? The next morning, I plastered a smile on my face, brewed my usual pot of tea, and laid out fresh bread as though nothing was wrong, because if she thought I suspected, she might retreat and change her tactics. And I didn't want her to hide, not yet. Not before I uncovered the whole truth. When she came over, her perfume filling my kitchen before she even sat down, I noticed how her eyes, sly as a fox, kept darting toward my desk and the shelves where I kept old folders, and every time she pretended to laugh, I could see the tension around her mouth, the hunger to get closer to what she believed I was hiding. My hands trembled as I poured her tea, but I steadied them on the saucer and asked her about Mark, about work, about small things, just to watch how impatient she became, as if she couldn't stand the small talk when bigger things were at stake. Friends, let me stop here and ask you something important. If you found out your daughter-in-law was plotting something behind your back, would you call her out right away and risk her turning the story against you? Or would you, like me, bite your tongue, play along, and let her think she was winning while you gathered every bit of proof? Tell me in the comments, because I truly want to know what you would do in my shoes. And while you're sharing your thoughts, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the little bell icon, because your support keeps me strong enough to tell these stories. And trust me, the twists still coming in this one will make your heart race. Later that week, Linda arrived with a man I had never seen before, dressed in a sharp suit with a leather briefcase that he placed carefully on my coffee table as though he owned the place. And she introduced him with a bright smile as a family friend who helps seniors plan their finances. And though every instinct inside me screamed that this was the person she had whispered to on the phone, I forced a warm smile and offered him cookies, because if this was the game they wanted to play, then I would play too. He opened the briefcase and spread out a pile of documents, speaking smoothly about protecting my assets and ensuring my future security, all while Linda leaned in close, nodding at every word like a student eager to please her teacher, but her eyes never once looked at me. They looked at the dotted lines waiting for my signature, like a wolf watching a trap snap shut. I asked questions, deliberately silly ones, to stall for time. What would happen if I signed tomorrow instead of today? What if I wanted to call my lawyer first? What if I misplaced the papers by accident? And though the man smiled and answered politely, I saw Linda's jaw tighten each time, her patience thinning, her mask slipping just a little. When I excused myself to fetch more cookies, I leaned against the counter in the kitchen, gripping the edge so hard my knuckles turned white, whispering to myself, "Stay strong, don't you dare let them win, don't you sign anything." And I took a deep breath, pasted on my sweetest smile, and returned as though I hadn't just been shaking with rage. They stayed nearly an hour, circling like vultures, but finally left when I refused to commit. And the moment the door closed behind them, I sank into my chair, trembling from head to toe, because now it was undeniable. This wasn't kindness or help. This was a scheme, a carefully laid trap, and my own daughter-in-law was leading it. That night I sat by the window, looking at the stars through my tears, asking myself the question that haunted me more than anything else. Was Mark truly blind to all of this, or was he silently letting her do it, thinking I was too old, too tired, too weak to fight back? The doubt cut through me like a blade, but in that same moment of despair, something fierce sparked inside me, and I swore to myself that no matter how fragile my hands looked or how slow my steps had become, I was not powerless, and Linda had made the mistake of underestimating the woman who had built this family from the ground up. The days that followed stretched endlessly, as though time itself slowed down to test my patience, and each hour I spent alone in the house carried the weight of 100 doubts, because every knock at the door, every ring of the telephone, set my nerves on edge, wondering whether Linda would appear again with another excuse or another set of papers meant to bind me in her web of lies. And I told myself that I could not let fear paralyze me, that if I truly wanted to protect what was mine, I needed to stay alert, observe, and record everything she did, because her mask was slipping little by little, and sooner or later she would make a mistake. And when she did, I would be ready. She began visiting with increasing frequency, each time pretending it was for some innocent reason. She said she wanted to bring me soup, then claimed she had left her scarf behind, then came by just to check on me. But the truth was plain in the way her eyes wandered over my shelves, my drawers, my desk, as if she were hunting for something. And each time I watched her gaze, I felt my stomach twist with both anger and sorrow, because how could someone who promised to be part of my family behave like a predator circling prey? One afternoon, she even complimented the old grandfather clock in the hall, a piece that had been in our family for generations, and then casually asked if I had ever had it appraised, or if there were papers about its value. And though I smiled and shook my head, I wrote her words down that night in my notebook, knowing that every little question, every slip of her tongue was proof of her obsession with what wasn't hers. Friends, let me ask you, and please be honest, if your daughter-in-law, someone you had welcomed into your home, into your heart, started asking strange questions about your belongings and pressing you to sign papers you barely understood, would you confront her immediately, risking that she would twist the truth to your own child, or would you hold your silence, waiting for her to reveal more of her hand? Tell me what you think, because I truly wonder how others would handle such a betrayal, and perhaps your words might give strength to someone else who finds themselves in a similar storm. The moment that confirmed my darkest suspicions came late on a Wednesday afternoon, when she arrived carrying a folder thicker than the others, and as she sat at my kitchen table pretending to chat about recipes, she slowly slid it toward me and said in a gentle voice, "Mom, I really think it would give everyone peace of mind if you signed these so we can take care of everything properly." Her words dripped with sweetness, but her eyes betrayed her hunger, sharp and glittering. And when I opened the folder, I saw forms more dangerous than the ones before, documents giving her rights over my accounts, permissions to make decisions in my name, and clauses that would strip me of control over what I had spent a lifetime building. My hand shook as I lifted the pen she had set beside the papers, and I let her believe it was the weakness of age, when in truth it was the weight of rage held back by sheer will. And I asked softly, "And if I sign these, dear, what happens then?" She leaned closer, lowering her voice as though she were confiding something precious, and whispered, "Then everything will be easier, for all of us." And though she smiled sweetly, her tone was that of someone who already considered the battle won. I nodded slowly, tucked the papers back into the folder, and said, "I'll give it some thought," before locking them away in my desk drawer. And though she kissed my cheek before leaving, I saw the way her jaw clenched, her eyes flashing with frustration at my refusal to fall neatly into her trap. That night, with only the lamp to keep me company, I pulled out the papers and read every line with a magnifying glass, circling words that reeked of deception, and the more I read, the colder my blood became, until I finally whispered to my late husband's photograph, "She thinks I am too old to fight, but she does not know me, not truly." I copied the worst clauses into my notebook, writing with trembling but determined hands, because I knew the day would come when I would have to lay bare every lie, and though fear still gnawed at me, fear that Mark might not believe me, fear that I was truly alone in this fight, I felt a fire spark deep within me, a reminder that age had not stolen my spirit, and that the woman Linda thought she could outwit was far stronger, far sharper, and far more patient than she could ever imagine. That week was one of the heaviest weeks of my life, and I remember it so clearly, as though every sound and shadow carried a secret whisper meant only for me, because Linda's mask of sweetness was slipping more and more each day, and what once looked like polite gestures now looked like sharp knives hidden under silk cloth, ready to strike when I turned my back. She began visiting me almost daily, sometimes pretending it was to bring groceries, sometimes to check on me, because she said she worried about my health, but her eyes were not on me. They were always searching the corners of my house, glancing toward the cabinet, the desk, the drawers, as if she had memorized the exact place where my documents were hidden. And every time she walked into my living room, I felt the air change, heavy, tense, like the moment before a storm breaks. I kept telling myself, stay calm, stay alert, don't give her anything. But deep down, my heart was pounding with the fear that perhaps one day, when I was distracted, she might find her way into what she wanted most. And I want to ask you, my dear listeners, what would you have done if you were in my place? Would you have shouted at her, told her to stay away, risked breaking your son's marriage? Or would you, like me, have pretended not to notice, played the role of the weak old woman, while inside you sharpened your senses, watching every move she made? Please tell me in the comments, because your thoughts matter. Sometimes I wonder if I was too patient, or maybe that patience was my only shield. One evening she came with a tray of food she claimed she had cooked just for me, smiling so sweetly, but her hands trembled when she placed it down, and I caught the quick flash of her eyes toward the drawer where my papers were kept. I forced myself to eat a little, though I didn't trust her food anymore. And while she spoke about trivial things, neighbors, the weather, how busy Mark was at work, I could feel the unspoken tension beneath her words, as though every sentence was just a veil hiding the real intention, to push me, to trick me, to make me slip and sign away what was mine. And let me confess to you all, I started keeping a notebook under my pillow, writing every detail, the way she asked about my accounts, the way she lingered near my desk, the way she once muttered under her breath, "It won't be long now," thinking I hadn't heard her. Each note was like a brick in the wall I was building, a wall of truth that would one day shield me if she tried to accuse me of lies. Nights were the hardest, lying awake, staring at the ceiling, asking myself if my own son knew anything, if Mark was blind to her schemes, or if he had chosen silence over justice. And that doubt was the cruelest cut of all. Because what is a mother to do if her child betrays her? I sat by the window many nights, whispering to the darkness, "Tell me if I can still trust him. Tell me if blood means loyalty anymore." And though no answer came, the silence gave me strength, because silence can be powerful if you know how to listen to it. My friends, do you see how dangerous it is when lies walk into a family? They do not just target money. They poison trust, they build invisible walls between mother and son, and they force love to fight against suspicion, and I was caught right in the middle of that battlefield. Still, I resolved to keep waiting, to gather more proof, because I knew that Linda, hungry and restless, would soon make a bigger mistake, and when she did, I would be ready. Not just with words, but with evidence, and perhaps even with witnesses, because I had begun to think of who else might see her true colors if I carefully invited them at the right time. The suspense was unbearable. But sometimes, the longer you let a snake slither, the clearer you see the pattern of its movements. And I was learning her pattern piece by piece, night by night, and though my hands trembled when I wrote my notes, my spirit did not break, because I knew I was not as powerless as she believed. The turning point came late one Friday evening, when the house felt unusually quiet. The kind of quiet that isn't peaceful, but instead presses against your skin until you can hear the thumping of your own heartbeat in your ears. And I had just settled into my armchair with a cup of tea when I noticed something strange. The front door, which I always made sure was locked, was slightly ajar, not wide open, but just enough to tell me someone had slipped inside without announcing themselves, and immediately my body went stiff, my hand tightening around the cup until it almost cracked, because at that moment I knew instinctively that this was the night Linda would overstep her boundaries, the night she would cross into territory. She thought I couldn't guard. I rose slowly, careful not to make a sound, and from the corner of the hallway I saw her silhouette moving in the dim light, crouched near my desk, the very desk where my important papers were kept, and I felt both fury and sorrow rise in me like a storm, because there she was, the woman who had smiled at me so sweetly in front of my son, now rifling through my belongings like a thief in the night. I ask you, my dear friends, what would you have done if you were standing where I was, an old woman watching her daughter-in-law commit betrayal under her roof? Would you have shouted? Would you have dragged her out by her arm, or would you, like me, have stood frozen for a moment, letting the reality soak in until the weight of it nearly crushed your chest? Write in the comments what you would do, because maybe your courage would have been stronger than mine, maybe your patience thinner, or maybe you too would have held your breath and waited. I decided in that moment not to reveal myself immediately. Instead, I stepped back into the shadows and watched, my fingers trembling as I gripped the edge of the wall, my mind racing as I realized she wasn't just searching blindly. She went straight for the drawer, straight for the folder, as though she had memorized its place, and she pulled out the envelope of documents I had sealed just days earlier. The audacity nearly stole the breath from my lungs, but still, I stayed quiet, because I needed to see what she would do next, needed to let her actions betray her fully. She opened the envelope, scanned the first page, and then I saw her lips curl into a satisfied smile, the kind of smile that told me she had found exactly what she wanted. At that moment, my heart broke and hardened all at once. Broke because this was my son's wife, someone who should have protected me. Hardened because now I had undeniable proof that she was not just curious, not just meddling, but actively plotting to take what was mine. She took out her phone, snapping pictures of the papers, and I thought to myself, this is it. This is her mistake. Her arrogance is her downfall. My hands were sweating, my knees shaking, but still I waited, and when she finally slid the papers back and turned to leave, I stepped forward into the dim light of the hallway. "Looking for something, dear?" I asked, my voice steady though my body felt like it might collapse at any second. And the look on her face, oh, my friends, I will never forget it. Her eyes went wide, her mouth opened, but no words came out, and she looked like a child caught with a hand deep in the cookie jar. For a moment she tried to smile, stammering that she was just checking if the window by my desk was closed, but we both knew that lie was thinner than paper. I raised my hand and said, "Save your excuses, Linda. I've seen enough." Her face flushed, then hardened, and she muttered that I didn't understand, that everything she did was for Mark, for our future. But those words rang hollow, because nothing about theft and deceit builds a future worth having. My dear listeners, imagine standing there, confronting a snake that has been living in your garden, and finally realizing it had fangs sharper than you ever believed. Would your heart forgive, or would it fight? Tell me in the comments, because I want to know how you would face betrayal when it comes from inside your family. For me, I knew this was no longer a private matter. It was time for the truth to come out in the open, no matter how much it tore at Mark's heart. Because if I stayed silent any longer, Linda's lies would grow bold enough to consume everything. The confrontation that night changed everything in my family forever. And as I stood in that hallway with Linda staring back at me, her face pale, and her hands clutching the envelope she had no right to touch, I felt the weight of every sacrifice I had ever made for my son, and the crushing ache of betrayal by the woman who had promised to love him. And though my knees trembled and my throat felt dry, my voice came out firm when I said, "Linda, you cannot lie your way out of this." And the silence that followed was so deep I could hear the tick of the old grandfather clock in the living room, like a drum counting down to an explosion. For a moment she looked like she might collapse, but then her mask shifted again, and she straightened her back, her eyes narrowing with a defiance that chilled me. "I only wanted to make sure our future was secure," she said, her voice shaking but louder than before. as if repeating it might make it true, and I shook my head slowly, my heart breaking with every beat, because the woman in front of me wasn't just greedy. She was convinced her betrayal was justified. "No," I said, "you wanted control, you wanted power, and you thought you could take it from an old woman too tired to fight back, but you underestimated me." Friends, I want to pause here and ask you, what would you have done in my place? Would you have called the police right then, thrown her out into the night no matter what it meant for your son? Or would you have done what I chose to do, which was wait until Mark came home so that he could hear the truth with his own ears and see it with his own eyes? Tell me in the comments, because I know many of you might be braver or harsher than me, but remember, this was my son's wife, and no matter how much anger burned in me, my heart still thought of his pain. When Mark returned that evening, I sat him down at the kitchen table, the same table where I had once served him bowls of soup when he was a child, the same table where he had done his homework, and I told him everything from the very beginning, the little slips of Linda's tongue, the strange visits, the way she lingered near my desk, the night I caught her photographing my papers. At first his face twisted in disbelief, his voice rising as he said, "Mom, you must have misunderstood, but when I placed my notebook in front of him, filled with dates and times, when I showed him the photos Linda had taken on her own phone that I had seen with my eyes, his silence grew heavy. And Linda's excuses, her pleas, her sobbing that it was all for him, rang hollow against the truth." He looked at her then with an expression I had never seen before, hurt so deep it seemed to cut the light from his eyes, an anger that cracked through his voice when he whispered, "You betrayed my mother and you betrayed me." In that moment I wanted to hold him, to shield him from the pain, but I knew this was a wound only truth could make, and though it hurt, it was better than the slow poison of lies. Linda begged. She dropped to her knees. She reached for his hand, but Mark pulled away. And I knew that whatever future she had imagined was crumbling into dust before her very eyes. The days that followed were not easy. There were arguments, there were tears, there was silence that echoed through the house like a ghost, but through it all there was also a strange relief, because the snake had been revealed, and though the venom still lingered, it could no longer hide in the grass. To this day, I sometimes wonder, if I had stayed quiet, would Linda have eventually taken everything? Would she have broken me completely and left Mark trapped in a marriage built on deceit? Perhaps. But I chose to face the storm, and though the rain was cold and the thunder loud, it washed the lies away and left me standing in the truth. And so I ask you one last time, dear friends, if you were me, would you have spoken out, knowing it would shatter your son's heart? Or would you have kept the peace a little longer, risking everything in the hope that love might change her? Share your thoughts below, because I want to hear your voices, your wisdom, your strength. And if this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment about what you would have done in my place, because your support helps me keep sharing these stories with you. And I promise you, more tales of family, betrayal, and resilience are yet to come.